Craigslist, where you can find anything from a used couch to the deal of a lifetime. But what happens when the bargain you're hunting turns into a bone-chilling nightmare? Today, we're diving into 3 terrifying Craigslist encounters that left people questioning if they'd survive. Each story is a real account, and they'll make you think twice about meeting a stranger you met online. Imagine a simple search for furniture leading to someone tampering with your doorknob in the middle of the night. Or a hunt for a great car deal that ends with a life-or-death escape from a remote property. And finally, a transaction over a smartphone that turns into a terrifying home invasion. If that sounds spine-chilling, stay tuned, because these tales only get darker. It all started innocently enough. A young woman, just 22 years old, was searching for a couch on Craigslist. Like so many others, she was drawn to the promise of a great deal. Scrolling through listings, she came across one that seemed perfect, affordable, stylish, and exactly what she needed to complete her apartment. She reached out to the seller via email, but something about their response felt off. The email address was strange, a mix of random numbers and letters, and the tone of the reply was oddly pushy. The seller insisted on delivering the couch to her house, even after she politely declined. Uneasy, she decided to change the plan. Instead of allowing the seller into her space, she offered to visit his home instead. The day of the meeting arrived. As she pulled up to the address, her gut feeling worsened. The house looked run down, almost abandoned, and the couch was in far worse condition than the photos had shown. She decided to decline the offer, explaining she wasn't interested anymore. That's when things took a darker turn. The seller, a middle-aged man with an unsettling smile, became uncomfortably insistent. "You can have it for free," he said, leaning in too close, "if you do me a little favor." She didn't wait to hear what he meant. Her heart pounding, she quickly made an excuse and left, praying that was the end of it. But it wasn't. Later that night, as she settled into bed, she heard strange noises outside her apartment, the sound of someone tampering with her doorknob. Then, faint footsteps near her backyard. Panic set in as she realized the seller might have followed her home. She called the police, who searched the area but found nothing. That didn't stop her from feeling watched. After that night, she couldn't sleep peacefully again. Every creak of her apartment made her jump, and the thought of Craigslist filled her with dread. She never found out if the man was truly responsible for what happened, but one thing was clear: that simple search for a couch had forever changed how she viewed strangers online. Our next story begins with a father, determined to find a reliable car for his teenage son. Like many parents on a budget, he turned to Craigslist, hoping to score a great deal. After some searching, he found it, a Toyota Camry listed at an unbelievably low price. The seller, a man named Bob, claimed he was looking to sell quickly, citing financial troubles. It all seemed reasonable, and the father decided to take the chance. Bob gave him an address, a remote property several miles outside of town. The location was a little odd, but the father shrugged it off, attributing it to the seller's financial situation. So, he drove out there, thinking he'd spend a quick half-hour checking out the car, closing the deal, and heading home. When he arrived, things immediately felt wrong. The property was run down, littered with junk, and most concerning of all, there was no car in sight. Instead, the yard was scattered with rusted car parts, old tools, and broken machinery. Hesitant but hopeful, the father got out of his car and knocked on the front door. No answer. He called out for Bob, but the place was eerily silent. As he debated whether to leave, he heard something, a phone ringing inside the house. Someone was definitely there. His unease grew as he waited, but no one came to the door. He stepped back, unsure what to do next. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed something through a window, a figure standing near the back door. Relief washed over him. Bob must have been outside the whole time. He walked toward the back, ready to call out again, but as he got closer, he froze. The figure wasn't moving. It wasn't Bob at all. It was a taxidermied human figure, grotesquely lifelike and staring blankly into the yard. His stomach dropped. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead as he realized someone had deliberately placed it there. Whether it was a prank or a warning, he didn't stick around to find out. Feeling an overwhelming sense of being watched, he bolted back to his car and sped away. To this day, he believes he narrowly escaped something far worse. The deal of a lifetime had turned into a brush with what he could only describe as pure evil. The final story begins with a man looking for a good deal on an iPhone. He found a seller on Craigslist offering an iPhone 5 for a reasonable price. Nothing so cheap that it seemed suspicious, but still a bargain. To stay safe, he decided to meet the seller in a public parking lot and brought his brother along for extra security. The meeting started off normal enough. The seller arrived on time, handed over the phone, and waited while the man inspected it. Everything seemed legitimate. However, when it came time to pay, the seller suddenly demanded more money than they had agreed upon. Standing firm, the man refused and handed over the original amount they'd discussed. The seller hesitated but eventually took the money and left. Relieved, the man and his brother drove off, thinking the ordeal was over. But within minutes, they realized they were being followed. The seller's car, with another man in the passenger seat, was tailing them closely. Panicking, the brothers tried everything to lose the tail, switching lanes, making random turns, and even driving in circles. But the seller stayed right behind them. Desperate, the driver made a split-second decision. He ran a red light, hoping the other car wouldn't risk following. It worked. The seller hesitated, and the brothers escaped. Thinking they were safe, they finally headed home. But later that night, as they were settling in, their nightmare escalated. Around midnight, there was a loud banging at the front door. Looking through the peephole, the man saw the Craigslist seller standing there, this time armed with a gun. The seller shouted through the door, threatening to break in and claiming he had a score to settle. Terrified, the man woke his father, who immediately armed himself while they called a police officer friend for help. As they waited, the banging turned to gunfire. A silenced shot shattered the quiet, piercing through the door and narrowly missing the father. Seconds felt like hours until flashing lights finally filled the driveway. Their police officer friend had arrived. The seller and his accomplice tried to flee, but they didn't get far. Both men were arrested on the spot, and the gun was confiscated. It was only later that the family realized just how close they had come to disaster. For the buyer, the relief was overwhelming, but the trauma lingered. A simple transaction for a phone had nearly cost them their lives.